doing, I wish to indicate, in pursuant to Article 171, paragraph 2 of the Constitution, the Cabinet would recommend the National Assembly proceed upon this motion. Mr. Speaker, even though we might today still be far short of the parliamentary term, this third budget of the 10th Parliament and the impending debate thereon inevitably offers some occasion for mid-term introspection. In looking back at the first half of this term of office, it would take little effort to regurgitate the innumerable challenges of this unprecedented parliamentary configuration, styled by some a new dispensation. Unavoidably over the course of the imminent debate, the anatomy of these challenges will once again come under the microscope and be dissected from every imaginable perspective. Suffice it to say for now, our constitutional framework has been put to the test. The boundaries of parliamentary norms and traditions have been stretched. New judicial interpretations have had to be sought and obtained, and legislative decision-making in support of national development has become considerably more complicated and significantly more protracted than ever before. The headlines and conversations have been firmly seized and largely dominated by the more graphic parliamentary impasses, such as those on the Minor Falls hydropower project and the anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism amendment bills. These instances, Mr. Speaker, are merely illustrative of the gravely debilitating consequences of legislative stalemate. Amidst all this and more, including persistently unhelpful external conditions, the task before this People's Progressive Party civic government has been to ensure that progress and development are not stymied or slowed in our country, a task to which we remain resolutely faithful and at which we have still managed to accomplish much. In the first 2 years of the current term, self-styled new dispensation notwithstanding, our government has ensured the gains of our previous terms of office were extended on and built upon. Over the biennium, the Guyanese economy has continued to grow at an annual average of 5%, time and growth in the Caribbean averaged 1.3%. Foreign direct investment totaled $507.7 million US, when FDI flows elsewhere have been contracting dramatically. Private sector credit expanded by 34.6% cumulatively, and our external debt has declined from 46.7% to 41.9% of GDP. Over the same period, our government has invested a total of $89.8 billion in the education and health sectors, and a total of $20.7 billion on our country's roads and bridges network. We have injected $9.7 billion into the sugar industry and spent a further $6.2 billion subsidizing electricity in Linden, Mopani. We've increased old age pensions from $7,500 to $12,500 monthly. We've continued to pay water charges for old age pensioners and introduced an annual electricity subsidy of $20,000 for the same target population. We've increased the income tax threshold from $40,000 to $50,000 monthly. We've introduced mortgage interest relief for first-time homeowners, and we've reduced the personal income tax rate from 33.33% to 30%. We've recruited over 290 new doctors, trained 6,465 teachers in information and communications technology, and distributed 10,286 new house lots. Mr. Speaker, every day, chief executive officers of large companies, small business owners, and heads of households across our country grapple with the challenges of balancing amongst competing calls on finite resources. Worthwhile investment opportunities have to contest against each other for funding. Consumption needs have to be prioritized, and savings have to be accumulated for unforeseen difficult circumstances. These choices, Mr. Speaker, are not drastically different at the national level. As a country, we need to make the investments that are critical to raising quality of life for all our people. At the same time, we need to be constantly attentive to guarding the fiscal sustainability that we've worked so hard to achieve, and that could so easily be lost if the wrong choices were made today. We need to implement the catalytic and transformative projects to see a truly modern Guyana emerge to take advantage of the opportunities of the future and realize our long-term growth potential. At the same time, we need to address urgently the local nuisances that affect the day-to-day lives of our people. In all aspects of productive activity, Mr. Speaker, we need to endeavour constantly to do more, and at the same time, we need to endeavour constantly to do what we do better. Budget 2014 seeks to continue the work this government has been doing to build a more modern and prosperous Guyana. It seeks to promote both the creation of employment and business opportunities and to better equip our citizens to avail themselves of those opportunities. It seeks to expand our physical infrastructure and improve linkages with our neighbours. It seeks to improve the quality of our social services and address the concerns of our citizens about the cleanliness of their physical surroundings. It seeks to further improve the competitiveness of our business environment and strengthen our institutions. Mr. Speaker, we may attend sitting after sitting and argue and compete in this National Assembly over matters that we regard as politically important in the seemingly interminable contest for political space. The bottom line is that the average Guyanese person should be able to engage in fulfilling economic activity either as an entrepreneur or in a job commensurate with his skills. He should be able to own his own home and realize that aspiration. He should have opportunities to raise the level of his professional and technical qualifications and be able to educate his children so that they can enjoy an even better quality of life than he would have. He should be able to access a decent public health care system. And importantly, he and his family should have good reason for being optimistic about the future. They should be motivated and incentivized for personal upliftment and upward mobility. Ours, Mr. Speaker, is the obligation to ensure that these needs are met and that these aspirations are realized. In this August Assembly, in all our deliberations and on every occasion we are required to make a decision and cast a vote, we must constantly be mindful of this, and be guided always by the answer to the question whether the choices we make will prove helpful or hindrance in meeting those very basic but eminently reasonable expectations of the Guyanese people. Mr. Speaker, against this background, and continuing to be guided by the philosophy and principles outlined in the manifesto and by the pillars identified in our first budget speech for the current term, our government's commitment is to remain faithful to the task of ensuring steady and sustainable improvement in the quality of life enjoyed by the Guyanese people. Budget 2014 is therefore presented under the theme, A Better Guyana for All Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, I will now review global economic developments. The global economy has finally started to display signs of recovery, lifting itself out of the harshest economic crisis in living memory, even if at a somewhat modest pace. Significant policy action and improved policy coherence are still needed if growth and job creation are to be accelerated. Global output expanded largely on account of stronger demand in advanced economies and an associated export rebound in emerging economies. The world economy grew by 3% in 2013. More advanced economies grew by 1.3%, the United States economy leading this performance with growth of 1.9%, while the economies of Japan, United Kingdom, and Canada each grew by 0.7%. In contrast, the economy of the euro area contracted by 0.4%. Emerging and developing economies grew more rapidly by 4.7%, with China maintaining its long trend of strong growth, 7.7%, while India grew more moderately at 4.4%. 2014, the global economy is projected to grow by 3.7%. 2.2% growth projected in advanced economies and 5.1% in emerging and developing economies. Growth in the US economy is projected at 2.8%, the euro area at 1% after 2 consecutive years of contraction, in China at 7.5%, in India at 5.4%. Mr. Speaker, non-oil commodity prices declined generally in 2013, while oil prices recorded a modest increase. The latter peaked in September at $109 per barrel, and then declined later to end of 2013 at $105 per barrel, 4.3% higher than the end of 2012. The world market price for gold declined by 27.4%, $1,225 per ounce at the end of 2013, having fallen as far as $1,190 per ounce in June of last year, having previously risen as high as $1,895 per ounce in September 2011. Aluminum prices ended the year at $1,740 per ton, 16.6% lower than at the end of 2012. The world market price for sugar and rice declined by 14.5% and 20.9% respectively, and that for wheat decreased by 16.2%. Mr. Speaker, the economy of the Latin American and Caribbean region grew by 2.6% in 2013 and is projected to grow by 3.2% in 2014. The Brazilian economy grew by 2.4% in 2013 and is projected to grow by 2.6% next year. The Caribbean region recorded marginal growth of 1.3% in 2013, up from 1.2% the previous year. With commodity exporters still growing significantly more rapidly than tourism-dependent economies, notwithstanding the moderation in commodity prices on the world market. In 2014, the outlook for the sub-region is still favorable, with growth projected at 2.1%, and all Caribbean countries anticipate positive growth. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, several countries in the sub-region continue to grapple with challenges of unsustainable debt burdens and scarce availability of financing for investment and development. Turning now to domestic macroeconomic developments. Real GDP. Mr. Speaker, over the years, our government has aimed at creating an environment where the private sector can invest in profitable enterprise, expand production of goods and services, and create jobs. These efforts have resulted in a demonstrably more diversified productive base. It is this growing level of structural diversification, supported by our government's attention to stable macroeconomic fundamentals and prudent public financial management, that has contributed to the economic resilience we've achieved, and that has enabled us to withstand testing external and domestic shocks. Mr. Speaker, in 2013, the Guyanese economy recorded its 8th consecutive year of growth, with real GDP expanding by 5.2%. Non-sugar GDP grew even more rapidly, by 6.3%, reflecting the underlying strength of the other sectors of the economy. Mr. Speaker, it is of particular significance to note that the 8 years from 2006 to 2013 represents the longest period of uninterrupted real economic growth in independent Guyana. Sectoral performance. Mr. Speaker, while the overall performance of the economy remains strong, the sugar industry continued to struggle. Sugar production contracted by 14.4% in 2013 to 186,770 tons, extending further the industry's underperformance in recent years. The issues confronting the industry, such as labor shortages and interruptions, irregular weather, managerial capacity constraints are well known. A more concerted effort is required to return the industry to a growth trajectory that will be consistent with viability and profitability. The rice industry, on the other hand, had another favorable year, with production of 535,439 tons in 2013, 26.9% over the previous year's output, and setting a new record for the highest ever annual production in the history of the industry. Ongoing investments in drainage and irrigation, increased acreage, and improved yields together favor continued annual production of over 500,000 tons well into the medium term. Production of other crops, Mr. Speaker, grew by 4.2%, while livestock production increased by 4.3%. The fisheries industry declined by 6.5% due to some overfishing, which resulted in suspension of further industrial fishing licenses and reduction in the operation of trawler fleet. The forestry industry grew by 5%, with total production of 398,964 cubic meters. Mr. Speaker, the mining and quarrying industry recorded 8% growth over 2012. Gold industry in particular achieved total declarations of 481,087 ounces, 9.7% above the previous year, and a historic performance. Of particular note, Mr. Speaker, last year's level of declarations represents the highest level of production in the history of the industry, exceeding production levels even when Omai gold mines were at their peak. The fortunes of bauxite were somewhat more tempered, the industry registering an 11% decline in value-added production. Diamond declarations increased by 56.9%, while stone production grew by 47.8%, the latter reflecting the strong boom in construction activity across the country. Mr. Speaker, the manufacturing sector grew by 8%. This reflected growth in the manufacturing component of rice, aided by a 5.4% growth in other manufacturing, but offset partially by the decline in sugar manufacturing. Service industries continued to record overall positive growth, with 5.5% achieved at the end of 2013. This growth was led by the construction sector, which recorded 22.6% growth as a result of vibrant expansion in private sector construction, buoyed by the National Housing Drive and by commercial construction, as well as implementation of public sector construction projects. Information and communication grew by 5.9%, reflecting continued growth in demand with increased availability of information technology products and services. Wholesale and retail trade declined by 0.9%, consistent with reductions in imports of consumption, intermediate and capital goods. Electricity and water output grew by 5.6%, transport and storage by 4%, finance and insurance by 11.2%, rental of dwellings by 5.6%, while other services declined by 3%. Public administration, education, and health grew by 2.5%, 3.5%, and 4% respectively, reflecting increased activity in the social sector. Mr. Speaker, at the end of 2013, the balance of payments deficit was contained to $119.5 million. This outturn is attributed principally to current account developments, including a decline in net current transfers, coupled with higher surface payments, along with a lower capital account surplus. Export earnings contracted marginally by 2.8% to $1.4 billion, mainly due to a sharp decline in gold prices, along with lower export volumes of sugar, bauxite, and timber. Export earnings on sugar contracted by 13.6% to $140.2 million due to an 18% decline in export volume, outweighing the 6.3% increase in prices. Rice export receipts expanded by 22%, mainly on account of an 18.2% increase in export volume, combined with a 3.4% increase in average export prices. Gold exports amounted to $648.5 million, a 9.5% decline compared to 2012. This was due to the sharp decline in average realized prices, outweighing the 6% increase in export volume. In addition, bauxite exports contracted to $134.6 million due to a 24.7% decline in export volume, outweighing the 18.6% increase in export prices. Timber exports declined by 1.4% to $38.5 million, primarily as a result of lower export volume. Mr. Speaker, merchandise imports declined by 7.5% to $1.8 billion. Across the categories, capital goods contracted by 9.7%, non-fuel intermediate goods by 3.3%, fuel and lubricants by 9.9%, and consumption goods by 6.1%. Net current transfers decreased by 15.7% to $353.2 million due to lower receipts of worker remittances, which declined by $141.1 million to $328.2 million. Net payment of services amounted to $307.1 million compared to $204.6 million due to a $107.1 million increase in non-factor services. Mr. Speaker, the capital account recorded a lower surplus of $340.8 million compared to $480.3 million, attributed to some moderation in FDI concentrated mainly in the mining and quarry sectors. Total FDI amounted to $214 million compared to $293 million previously. Mr. Speaker, gross international reserves of Bank of Guyana amounted to $776.9 million, equivalent to 3.9 months of import cover at the end of 2013. Mr. Speaker, monetary policy continues to focus on maintaining stable prices while promoting private sector credit. Net domestic credit by the banking system is estimated to have expanded by 25.2% to $123.9 billion in 2013. Credit to the private sector expanded by 14.5%, reflecting growth in all sectors. Manufacturing, construction, engineering, personal and real estate sectors grew by 22%, 18.8%, 17.4%, and 16.9%, respectively. In addition, credit to mining and quarrying also grew by 13.9%, followed by agriculture and rice milling, which registered growth of 30.7% and 9.9%, respectively. Mr. Speaker, domestic prices remained relatively flat throughout the year, aided by government's continued financial support to the Guyana Power and Light Inc. and other electricity suppliers in order to contain electricity prices, as well as close monitoring of fuel prices and taxes to dampen the pass-through of imported price volatility. In addition, our continued emphasis on food production ensured an adequate supply of food commodities throughout the year and helped to moderate prices. Altogether, these conditions resulted the consumer price index movement of 0.9% in 2013, the lowest rate of inflation in decades. Mr. Speaker, during 2013, the weighted average lending rate of the commercial banks increased by 8 basis points to 11.16%. This reflected a marginal increase from 11.08% in 2012. But notwithstanding this movement, private sector credit, as I just reported, continued to expand. Small savings rates declined by 36 basis points to 1.33%, while the 91-day Treasury bill rate remained stable at 1.45%. Mr. Speaker, transactions on the domestic foreign exchange market contracted by 5.8% to $6.4 billion. Key exchange rates remained stable throughout the year. And at the end of the year, the Guyana dollar was being traded against the US dollar at $206.25 compared to $204.5 a year ago. Mr. Speaker, over the years, our government has ensured that public sector employees are granted steady increases in their wages and salaries despite prevailing fiscal constraints. In keeping with this commitment, a 5% increase in salaries was granted to teachers in the public education system with effect from January 2013, pursuant to the Memorandum of Understanding entered into between government and the Guyana Teachers Union for the years from 2011 to 2015. Later in the year, government also granted a 5% across-the-board increase to all public servants and members of the disciplined services with effect from January 2013, along with a 1-month tax-free basic salary incentive paid to members of the disciplined services in December 2013. In addition, during 2013, government issued a new national minimum wage order, an initiative strongly supported by both the private sector and organized labor. This order, introduced with effect from 1st of July 2013, for the first time in our country's history, a national minimum wage applicable to all sectors of the economy, public and private. Set at $202 per hour, $1,660 per day, $8,080 per week, or $35,000 per month. This initiative will benefit an estimated 31,000 working persons. Prior to the promulgation of this order, no national minimum wage was in force, and only a small number of specific categories of employment were the subject of sector-specific minimum wage orders. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, government reduced the personal income tax rate from 33.33% to 30% in 2013, resulting in more than 184,000 taxpayers benefiting from increased disposable incomes. Together, these initiatives contributed significantly to improving the well-being of the working people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, the deficit of the non-financial public sector was contained to $28.7 billion, or 4.7% of GDP. Total current revenue collections for 2013, net of inflows from the Guyana Red Plus Investment Fund, popularly known as GRIF, amounted to $135.7 billion, 4.8% rather, over 2012, reflecting strong performance across several tax categories. Tax revenue collections, which accounted for 93.3% of total revenue collections, net of GRIF inflows, amounted to $126.5 billion, a 6.9% increase over 2012. Mr. Speaker, internal revenue collections amounted to $51.7 billion, an increase of 6.3% over 2012 collections. This is attributed to continued growth of the private sector, as evidenced by corporation tax collections increasing by 16.5% to $21.6 billion, reflecting increases in several sectors within this category, including financial, telecommunications, manufacturing,